So, Katrina.
You know,
He takes a deep breath.
yeah, I tell you, what can I say about Katrina?
Because you've been asked this. You've written an essay for my journal. I mean, you've
Yeah,
talked
I've
about this a lot. We're interested in disaster resilience leaders. What makes them tick? How does their mind work?
Yeah.
Take us on a journey.
Well, you know, let me take you a few days before Katrina made landfall. We knew the Friday before the storm that it was going to make landfall, you know, right near New Orleans, and it was going to be very drastic. What we thought was that it would make landfall, we'd close for 4 or 5 days, and we would reopen. But we did all the things in our hurricane plan that we said that we would do. And quite honestly, with one exception, the hurricane plan worked very well. We evacuated 600 students, none of them were harmed. All our faculty and staff were gone other than those that were required to stay here on this campus and the downtown campus, including me. So we executed everything, and that was the good news. And then when the storm happened on Monday, the 29th, you know, it's hard to describe the storm. It's just unbelievable watching it. I was on campus in the Riley Center, and it was just, you know, watching trees fly by. I saw a boat fly by, and, you know, you say to yourself, you know, what is the world's going on? But when the storm was over, you know, I walked out of the Riley Center, there was no water on our campus. None. And we had communications, we had sewer, we had water. We might not have had power, but we had all the other things. And I said,
you dodged a bullet.
That's exactly the word I used. We dodged a bullet. I said, you know, we can clean the campus up, and, you know, we'll be back in business in a week. And matter of fact, I went out on campus and I started cleaning stuff up because I had nothing else to do. I was checking with the downtown because that's where our patients were in the hospital. And then I went back to the Raleigh Center that night, and I heard the levees had been breached. And we really didn't know what that meant. I mean, we knew what the word breach meant, so we knew that, you know, it was topping the levees and they had broken through, but we didn't know what the consequences would be. But we said, you know, we probably ought to stay here on campus a few more days and see. Well, within 18 hours, what happened was we had on the uptown campus, 70% of it was flooded with an average of about 2 feet of water. The whole downtown campus was flooded. We lost all power, we lost all communications, and the sewers went out. So what we became is a little island up here, and we had no idea what was going on in the rest of New Orleans. I mean, all we knew was where we were because you couldn't communicate with anybody. We didn't have enough food or water. I mean, we had it for a couple of days, but we didn't have enough. So we had some boats, thankfully, that we had, you know, taken from underneath the Riley Center. So we got in the boats and began to go to various buildings where we knew food and water was, and we gathered food and water for a day. But nonetheless, we still couldn't do anything else. And it was August, so it was 95 degrees, the humidity was 100, and you have no toilets and you have no water. So we had to sort of make do with the Riley pool and take shifts with women and men and do everything else. But that wasn't, and we just, then the looting started and people started coming around, you know, campus. It turned out some of our physical facility guys had in their trucks some weapons, and they took them out. And remember keeping guard 24 hours a day. And in the meantime, the only thing, you couldn't use a cell phone, you couldn't use a satellite phone, there was no communications whatsoever. The only thing that worked was text messaging, and I still don't understand the technology enough to know why text messaging. So some of my people were text messaging me saying, you know, we're going to try to get a helicopter to get you out of here. And I said, if you do, you know, let's rendezvous in Houston. I mean, so as soon as I get out. And I said, here are 10 people, see if we can contact them, tell them to go to Houston. And as soon as I get out, I'll come. And I think it was about 5 or 6 days after Katrina that I eventually evacuated. And during that 5 or 6 days, you know, I was going strictly on adrenaline and just survival mode. I mean, that's what and I still did not have an idea of the breadth and depth of what was going on. So, you know, you were probably watching, and many of you watching the images on TV. I had no idea what was going on in the convention center, the Superdome. I had none of that. None of us did, because we're just surviving on our little patch of land or water. And I got to Houston, and there was, at that time, as I said, 10 or 12 people would gather there, and we got into a hotel. And I had the same clothes on I had been wearing for a week. and I didn't have anything, other than my wallet. I went to number 2 Audubon Place. There was 3 feet of water in it, so I didn't, stay there. I got out of that pretty quickly. And the most vivid memory I have was the night I got to Houston, Texas. I decided in the middle of the night I couldn't sleep because I was really thinking about what to do. And I remember calling my wife. She was in New York because I had evacuated her to New York. And I remember saying to her, I have no idea what to do. None. I said, there's no book you can read, or if the book existed, I didn't have it at my disposal, and there's no one you can call. And I felt so helpless and hopeless because I now for the first time saw the images. And I said, I have no idea what to do and how we're going to do this. We'd lost our IT system and our ability to communicate. And I remember talking to my wife, and she said, well, I know other times in your life you've been overwhelmed and you've had difficulties, and what do you try to do during a time like that? And I said, well, my simple way of dealing with things is try to drive out of my line of sight anything I can't control. Because why should I burn up a lot of psychic energy if I can't control it anyway? So what is it that I can control? And then what's the priority on those things that I can control? And we talked through it on the phone, and that began the process that I eventually followed. And how I followed it is that the next day, we got together, and I said, listen, what are the most important things we have to do today? Don't worry about a month from now. What do we have to do today? And we decided that there were 3 things we had to do in that day. And Charles, through sheer luck or maybe good judgment or both, we picked the right 3 things. The first one was to find a way to communicate to all our faculty and staff that they would all receive their pay the entire time we'd be closed. And the reason we did that, we knew they were going through their own individual situation, because they had all lost things. They lost their homes. They didn't know whether they had a job. So we could see, boy, you lost your home, you don't know if you're going to get a paycheck. And if there's some way we can guarantee for them that while we're closed, they'll be paid, that will ease some anxiety for them. The other feeling was, when it's all said and done, only universities are just a collection of great people, and if you don't have the people, you don't have a university, right? So we made that decision, and we announced it very quickly. By the way, that decision ultimately cost us $200 million at a time where we didn't have any money coming into the university. But it clearly engendered loyalty and commitment on part of the faculty and staff. The second decision we made in that first day was I got on the phone with the heads of the higher education associations in America. And I explained to them what had happened to us, and I said, I think this has also happened to Loyola and Dillard and Xavier and the rest of them. And we have all these kids now, all these students, and they're without a university to go to. And would you consider opening up your doors and letting new students come to your university, but only letting them come for 1 semester, not allowing them to transfer? Because if you allow them to transfer, it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And higher education, that was their bright light for me. They decided they did that. So we were able to give our students, some hope to say, listen, go to a university in your area. We'll find a way to transfer those credits here, and you'll keep busy, and you're doing something productive. And then the third one, which was probably the most audacious thing we decided, was to announce that we were going to open up on January 16th, 2006. We had no idea how we were going to do it, none, zero. But we kept saying to ourselves, we've got to give people something to shoot for. And it's not just a question of survival. They got to shoot for something that's tangible, that gives them hope. And so we just said, we're going to open up January 16th, 2006. So those are the 3 decisions we made, and they were really made within the first 24 to 48 hours we were in Houston. And then we started on the task of saying, okay, every morning we'd wake up, and I have it in the archives, and I'd have a flip chart, and I'd have whoever was in Houston, and over time we gathered ultimately to about 40 or 50 people in Houston. We actually rented a whole apartment building, and I brought everybody to Houston and their families. And every morning we'd start out early in the morning, and I'd have a flip chart, and I'd say, what do we have to do today? Don't even think about tomorrow or the day. What do we have to do today? And you'd be shocked to hear, the kinds of things. For example, is there anybody who can figure out how we can get mail? Because we know there are checks in the mail. And those checks are important because maybe we can get them deposited, and that gives us some cash flow. I mean, just the simplest kinds of things. And every day we started with a flip chart. And then the next day what we would do is before we wrote down what the objectives were for that day, we went over the flip chart from the day before and said, did we accomplish these things? And we'd give out tasks. We'd be sitting in a room like this and we'd say, Mail, that's your problem. You solve it. Here's the outcome we expect. And in some issues that were bigger issues, we would put groups together and say, you've got 48 hours to come up with some, We went like that day in and day out for weeks on end, working, probably 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. And what happened is everybody got caught up in the work. I mean, just grinding and grinding and grinding. But an interesting thing happened in probably the middle of October. In the middle of October, we were really beginning to believe that we could actually reopen our campuses on January 16, 2006. And we're starting to believe our own stuff here that we could do this. So we're pushing like crazy. And by then, we were up on the internet. And the way we got up is we lost our system, but David Philo, one of our alums, is the co-founder of Yahoo, and he put us on the Yahoo servers. So we reached out to David and said, David, could you put us, and he did that. And we began to survey students and faculty and staff. And we found out, yeah, we could open our campuses, but we'd be an island because the rest of New Orleans was shot. There were no schools, no place to live, no grocery stores, no hospitals. So we then spent the month of October, November, December building a village. And just about anything you can think of, we wound up, trying to find a solution for. So for living, we leased a cruise ship and we brought it and put it on the Mississippi River. 2,000 beds in the cruise ship. We opened up makeshift community health clinics, to take care of people. We chartered a school, Lusher School, that was K through 8, made it K through 12, and used that as our school. So we just systematically went through day by day. And we knew then by January that we would be able to reopen. But it also dawned on us that fall, we'd never reopen the way we were before. There's no way. So we had to think about how do we restructure ourselves to accomplish two goals. One is to maintain the academic quality of the institution, because that's what we're known for. And then financially, how to survive, because the losses were staggering. And they were projected to go on in perpetuity. Well, they wouldn't go on because we would have been out of business. So at the same time, we're trying to figure out how to just recover and reopen. We're working on what ultimately became the Renewal Plan for the future. And that happened all during the fall. So that's at 35,000 feet, sort of the process we went through. It was much more granular than I'm describing it to you, and it was a day-to-day kind of thing.
We're focusing on disaster resilience leadership, and I guess I'm wondering, given the fact that your area of expertise is turning around ailing businesses, programs, et cetera, what would you have us understand and appreciate about that process?
When I think about leadership, and I guess we're talking about in terms of disaster resilience and so on, there are 4 or 5 things I've come to believe separated some of the good ones. The first is resilience itself. Since Katrina, I've actually done some reading on the area of resilience. And I was reading some studies about Holocaust survivors and the attributes that they displayed that defined their resilience. And it really spoke to me, not just because I happen to be Jewish, also because it spoke to me because of my Katrina. And they said there were 3 attributes that highly resilient people have. One is they have an ability to see the reality. So they don't live in a fantasy land. They understand what is going on, and they can make reasonably accurate assessments of what's happening. And I've always said the antithesis to that is people who believe hope is a plan, that there's a disaster, but someone else is going to come and fix this for me. The second attribute that the resilient people have is they have a tremendous ability to be creative and to improvise. And you know this better because you're the scholar in the area, and I learned this through you. There's no playbook in a disaster. There's no playbook. So the ability to break out of the way you would think about things, to be creative, and to improvise is so critical. And the third one, which really, really resonated to me, was a strong moral compass, either because of faith or conviction. And I think the residue is that is during times like that, even though you're in the midst of a crisis, people expect their leaders wise and principled decisions. And even though you and I may have a difference about whether something was wise and principled, well, no, we may have difference about that particular decision. What you would hope is that Charles would say, I understand the principle that guided Scott. I may have had a different one, but it wasn't anything arbitrary and capricious. So resilience is one. The second thing that I found is in a disaster, and I've been watching President Obama with this, is during a crisis, leader has to be a great communicator and find a fine line between dispensing hope and dispensing reality. Because if you give people too much reality, you can destroy any sense of hope. If you give them too much hope void of reality, you lose credibility. So how do you balance that when you're in the midst of it to say, this is our situation, and you try to be as open and candid as you can, while at the same time saying, but there is hope here, and this is the pathway to hope. And I have found that that was so important. Our messaging, it's one of the things I'm proud of. Our messaging the days and weeks after Katrina was frequent, and we told people the actual times we would communicate. So we would say, you will get a message 4 times a day, and here's the exact times you're going to get it. We give them the times. Why did we do that? Because they're anxious, they want information, and they want a little structure in their life at a time there's chaos. So we tried to do that. And even if we had nothing to say, we'd write them at 3 o'clock and say, we have nothing to report, but we want you to know we're here and we're thinking about the issues. So this notion of hope and reality, the notion of communications is very important. It's a word overused, courage. You don't have the luxury of time. This is something that, I would talk to the faculty because there was a lot who felt like you shouldn't have done anything until we all came back. And then we could have all deliberated. I'm convinced to this day we would have been destroyed today if we had done that, because time is of the essence. Once again, you don't want to act too quickly and you don't want to act irrationally, but you don't want to take too much time. So it takes courage to go in there and make these tough decisions, understanding there's going to be somebody, if not more people, who are unhappy with what you're doing, but you just have to go out and do it. And you have to, put it back to, this is what I need to do to salvage the core mission and values of the institution. So those are some of the things that the takeaways that I had from it. I don't think any of us know until we're faced with the tragedy of whether we have the attributes. I mean, I admire you for having courses like this. I admire people who write about it. And I'm doing more and more writing about it myself. But the fact of the matter is, until that moment comes, and I hope it doesn't come for people, you just don't really know. And then you find out whether you have an inner strength or you don't have that inner strength. One of the things, Charles, that you may not know, I mean, during that time, there was a couple of senior people I had to put by the wayside because they weren't able to cope. And normally you would coach them, you would mentor them, and so on. But you don't have the time, you don't have the luxury to do it. And that was very painful. So those are some of the... I always feel awkward having this conversation because at the time I was doing it, I didn't know anything of what I'm now telling you. Does that make sense?
Sure.
I mean, I just did.
Making up as you went.
I just did because there wasn't any other option.
Sure.
You either did or, you had to get out of the way and let somebody else do it. Yeah. So it's only with the benefit of hindsight you begin to reflect on what happened. And I hope the reflections turn out to, well, for us they turned out to be at least helpful. I don't know how helpful they'll be to others. But whenever I have these conversations, I sometimes think I'm making more sense of it than it certainly made at the time we were doing it,